The phone call that would terrorize Ava Gardner for the next 6 years rang through her Madrid hotel room at 4:23 a.m. on October 12, 1951. Frank Sinatra's voice was cold, controlled, and more dangerous than she had ever heard it. "I know exactly where you are, baby. I know who you're with, what you're wearing, and what you had for dinner. You can run anywhere in the world, but you'll never be free of me. We belong together, and I'll destroy anyone who tries to come between us." Ava Gardner hung up the phone with trembling hands, realizing that her marriage to Frank Sinatra had ended, but his obsession with controlling her life was just beginning. What she didn't know was that Frank had already hired private investigators in 3 countries, bribed hotel staff across Europe, and begun a systematic campaign of harassment that would make her life a living hell for years to come. "Frank, this is over," Ava had whispered into the phone, but the line was already dead. In the months that followed, she would discover that ending a relationship with Frank Sinatra was not a choice he allowed his women to make independently. If Ava thought she could simply walk away from the most powerful entertainer in America, she was about to learn that Frank's definition of love included complete possession, total surveillance, and the destruction of anyone who dared to help her escape. The obsessive stalking campaign that Frank unleashed on Ava would involve private detectives, hotel break-ins, career sabotage, death threats, and international harassment operations that proved celebrity status could be weaponized to destroy the life of anyone who dared to reject Frank's demands for control. What began as the end of a tumultuous marriage would become a 6-year nightmare of psychological terrorism that would drive Ava to the brink of suicide, while demonstrating that Frank Sinatra's charm and talent concealed a darkness that made him dangerous to anyone who tried to leave him. If you're fascinated by the moment when celebrity obsession becomes criminal harassment, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This is the story of how Frank Sinatra's inability to accept rejection nearly destroyed the life of Hollywood's most beautiful actress. The marriage that was already doomed. 1951. Frank Sinatra's marriage to Ava Gardner was built on passion, jealousy, and the kind of volatile intensity that made their relationship as destructive as it was magnetic. Both were strong-willed, successful, and accustomed to getting what they wanted, creating a dynamic that was doomed to explode when their individual careers and personal needs conflicted. The relationship had been passionate but troubled from the beginning, characterized by spectacular fights, public scenes, and the kind of dramatic reconciliations that kept Hollywood gossip columnists in business while exhausting everyone involved in their personal and professional lives. Frank's possessiveness during their marriage had been legendary, with friends and colleagues witnessing explosive jealousy over Ava's co-stars, social interactions, and professional commitments that required her attention to be divided between her career and their relationship. Frank could be charming and romantic, but he was also incredibly possessive and controlling, recalled actress Debbie Reynolds, who witnessed many of their public arguments. He wanted Ava's complete attention and devotion, but he also wanted to continue his own career and social life without restrictions. It was an impossible situation for both of them. Ava's decision to end the marriage was motivated by Frank's increasing demands for control over her career, friendships, and personal choices. She had achieved success as an actress before meeting Frank, and was unwilling to sacrifice her independence for a relationship that required her to become Frank's possession rather than his equal partner. The final fight that ended their marriage occurred in October 1951, when Frank demanded that Ava refuse a film role that required extended location shooting in Spain. when Ava insisted on honoring her professional commitments. Frank's reaction was so violent and threatening that she realized their marriage had become dangerous to her physical and emotional well-being. However, Ava's assumption that ending the marriage would end Frank's involvement in her life proved catastrophically wrong. Frank's reaction to rejection was not acceptance or even normal post-divorce bitterness. It was an obsessive determination to maintain control over her life, regardless of her wishes or legal boundaries. Frank's wealth, connections, and celebrity status provided him with resources for harassment that most stalkers couldn't access, while his public image as America's favorite entertainer made it difficult for Ava to seek help without being dismissed as a vindictive ex-wife trying to damage Frank's reputation. The surveillance network that Frank established to monitor Ava's activities was sophisticated, international, and designed to demonstrate that her rejection of him would not be accepted or honored, regardless of what she wanted or where she tried to hide. The surveillance network begins, late 1951. Frank Sinatra's response to Ava's departure was the immediate establishment of a professional surveillance network designed to monitor her activities, relationships, and movements with the systematic thoroughness of a government intelligence operation. The private investigators that Frank hired were not amateur detectives, but experienced professionals who specialized in surveillance, information gathering, and the kind of discreet harassment that could destroy someone's life without leaving obvious evidence of criminal activity. Frank's surveillance of Ava was unlike anything I had seen in 30 years of private investigation, recalled Detective Mario Bello, who refused to participate in the operation after learning its scope. This wasn't just about gathering information. This was about psychological control and intimidation. Frank wanted Ava to know she was being watched, so she would feel powerless and trapped. The surveillance operation included hotel staff bribery, telephone monitoring, mail interception, and coordinated international tracking that followed Ava's movements across multiple countries and continents as she tried to escape Frank's obsessive attention. Frank's investigators infiltrated Ava's professional and social circles, gathering information about her work schedules, social plans, romantic interests, and personal relationships that was then used to intimidate her or interfere with her activities. The psychological impact of constant surveillance was immediate and devastating. Ava found herself looking over her shoulder, checking her hotel room for intruders, and avoiding social situations where she might be photographed or reported on by Frank's network of informants and investigators. Hotel break-ins became routine, with Ava's belongings searched, personal items moved or stolen, and evidence planted to demonstrate that Frank's investigators had unlimited access to her private spaces, regardless of security measures or geographic location. The international scope of Frank's surveillance network was particularly frightening, proving that Ava could not escape his obsessive attention by traveling to different countries or continents. Frank's resources and connections made his reach effectively unlimited. Most disturbing was the discovery that Frank's investigators were not just gathering information, but actively interfering with Ava's professional and personal relationships through intimidation, misinformation, and the kind of behind-the-scenes sabotage that could destroy careers and friendships. Career sabotage and professional interference, 1952. Frank's harassment of Ava escalated to professional sabotage as he used his entertainment industry connections to interfere with her film contracts, damage her professional relationships, and create financial pressure designed to force her to return to their marriage. Studio executives began receiving calls from Frank's representatives, suggesting that casting Ava in major productions would create complications and difficulties that could affect their project's success and profitability. These veiled threats were effective because Frank's industry influence could genuinely damage films through negative publicity or withdrawn support. Frank was systematically trying to destroy Ava's career, observed MGM executive Eddie Mannix. He used his connections to create problems for any studio that hired her, any director who cast her, and any co-star who worked with her. It was professional terrorism disguised as industry politics. The interference with Ava's career was particularly devastating because it threatened her financial independence, which Frank understood was the foundation of her ability to maintain separation from him. Without income from acting, Ava would be forced to depend on Frank financially, giving him leverage to control her life. Co-stars and directors began avoiding projects with Ava, not because of her professional capabilities, which remained excellent, but because association with her had become professionally dangerous due to Frank's willingness to create problems for anyone who worked with her. The sabotage extended beyond direct professional interference to include gossip column manipulation, where Frank's publicity connections were used to plant negative stories about Ava's behavior, professionalism, and personal life that damaged her reputation and employability. Frank's campaign against Ava's career was sophisticated enough to maintain plausible deniability, while creating genuine professional consequences that isolated her within the entertainment industry and limited her opportunities for work and income. The psychological pressure of career sabotage was compounded by Ava's awareness that Frank was deliberately destroying her professional life as punishment for rejecting him, demonstrating the extent of his power and his willingness to use it vindictively. International Harassment Campaign, 1953 to 1954. Ava Gardner's attempts to escape Frank's harassment by traveling to Europe backfired catastrophically when Frank expanded his surveillance and intimidation operations to include international locations where Ava hoped to find peace and privacy. Frank's detective network followed Ava to London, Paris, Rome, and Madrid, establishing surveillance operations that were coordinated across multiple countries and time zones to ensure that Ava could never escape his obsessive monitoring and control. The European harassment operations were even more intrusive than the American surveillance, with hotel staff corruption, telephone monitoring, and coordinated stalking that made Ava's international travel a nightmare of constant fear and paranoia about who was watching her and reporting to Frank. Ava couldn't go anywhere without Frank's people following her, recalled Spanish filmmaker Luis Buñuel, who directed Ava during this period. She was terrified, paranoid, and emotionally destroyed by the constant surveillance. It was affecting her work, her relationships, and her mental health in ways that were obvious to everyone around her. The international scope of Frank's harassment demonstrated the extent of his resources and connections, while proving to Ava that geographic distance provided no protection from his obsessive determination to control her life, regardless of her wishes or legal boundaries. European authorities were reluctant to interfere with what they viewed as a private matter between American celebrities, particularly when Frank's investigators were careful to operate within legal boundaries while creating maximum psychological pressure through systematic intimidation and surveillance. The harassment escalated to include interference with Ava's European romantic relationships, with Frank's investigators threatening her companions, spreading damaging rumors, and creating social pressure that destroyed her ability to form normal personal connections with anyone who might provide emotional support. Ava's European friends and colleagues began avoiding her, not because they disliked her personally, but because association with her had become socially and professionally dangerous due to Frank's vindictive willingness to destroy anyone who helped her maintain independence from him. The threats escalate, 1955. Frank Sinatra's harassment of Ava Gardner reached genuinely dangerous levels in 1955, when threats against her co-stars and romantic interests escalated from intimidation to promises of physical violence that made everyone around Ava fear for their safety. The death threats were delivered through Frank's network of associates and investigators, with male actors and directors who worked with Ava receiving explicit warnings that continued association with her could result in accidents and problems that would affect their health and careers permanently. Frank's people made it clear that anyone who got close to Ava would face serious consequences, recalled actor Stuart Granger, who co-starred with Ava during this period. These weren't just professional threats. These were promises of physical retaliation that made everyone afraid to be seen with her socially or professionally. The threats were effective because Frank's connections to organized crime figures made his promises of violence credible rather than empty intimidation. Hollywood professionals understood that Frank had access to people who could deliver on threats of physical harm without legal consequences. Ava's isolation became complete as friends, colleagues, and potential romantic partners avoided her rather than risk Frank's vindictive retaliation. The social and professional quarantine created by fear of Frank's threats left Ava emotionally devastated and professionally crippled. The escalating threats also targeted Ava directly, with messages promising that she would never be safe and never be free, regardless of where she tried to hide or what legal protections she sought against Frank's harassment and surveillance operations. Frank's use of intermediaries to deliver threats provided him with plausible deniability, while ensuring that his messages of intimidation and promises of retaliation were communicated clearly to everyone in Ava's personal and professional circles. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and systematic, designed to isolate Ava completely, while demonstrating Frank's power to destroy anyone who tried to help her maintain independence from his obsessive control and possessive demands. Ava's breaking point. 1956. The constant surveillance, professional sabotage, and death threats finally drove Ava Gardner to a complete emotional breakdown in 1956, when she attempted suicide rather than continue living under Frank's systematic harassment and psychological terrorism. Ava's suicide attempt was discovered by hotel staff at the Ritz Madrid, where she had been staying while trying to escape Frank's latest round of threatening phone calls and investigator surveillance. The overdose was serious enough to require hospitalization and demonstrated the devastating psychological impact of years of relentless stalking. Ava had reached the point where death seemed preferable to continuing to live in fear of Frank's obsessive harassment, recalled her friend and confidant, Boppy Gardner. She felt completely trapped, with no way to escape his surveillance and threats. The suicide attempt was a desperate cry for help from someone who had been psychologically tortured for years. The hospitalization forced Ava to confront the reality that Frank's harassment had destroyed her mental health, professional career, and personal relationships, while creating a state of constant fear and anxiety that made normal life impossible. However, even Ava's suicide attempt did not end Frank's harassment. His investigators continued monitoring her medical treatment, hospital visitors, and recovery progress, while Frank himself sent flowers and messages expressing concern for her health that were perceived as additional threats and intimidation. The medical professionals treating Ava recognized that her psychological trauma was the result of systematic stalking and harassment, but their recommendations for psychiatric care and legal protection were limited by the lack of anti-stalking laws and the difficulty of prosecuting someone with Frank's wealth, connections, and public image. Ava's recovery required her to acknowledge that Frank's harassment would continue until she took decisive legal action or found some way to make the psychological and financial costs of stalking her exceed the obsessive satisfaction he derived from controlling her life. The legal options available to Ava in 1956 were limited, but the suicide attempt had finally convinced her that Frank's harassment was genuinely life-threatening, and that passive endurance was no longer a viable strategy for survival. The Legal Battle and Final Escape, 1957. Ava Gardner's decision to seek legal protection from Frank Sinatra's harassment marked the beginning of the end of his 6-year stalking campaign, though the legal battle required enormous courage from someone who had been psychologically devastated by years of systematic intimidation and surveillance. The restraining order that Ava's attorneys obtained in 1957 was one of the first high-profile celebrity protection orders in American legal history, establishing precedents for how the legal system could address stalking behavior by wealthy, powerful individuals who used their resources to terrorize former intimate partners. Ava's legal case was groundbreaking because it documented the systematic nature of Frank's harassment while demonstrating how celebrity status and wealth could be weaponized to destroy someone's life, explained attorney Jerry Giesler, who represented Ava during the legal proceedings. The evidence presented in court included documentation of Frank's surveillance network, professional sabotage, threat delivery, and international harassment operations that shocked the legal system and demonstrated the sophisticated nature of celebrity stalking when conducted with unlimited resources. Frank's response to the legal action was characteristic. Initial denial, followed by attempts to discredit Ava's claims, blame her for provoking his behavior, and use his publicity connections to portray himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife's false accusations. However, the documented evidence of Frank's harassment was too extensive and systematic to be dismissed as normal post-divorce bitterness. The legal proceedings revealed a pattern of criminal stalking that had continued for years, despite Ava's clear expressions of desire to be left alone. The restraining order's effectiveness was limited by enforcement challenges, but the public legal proceedings finally exposed Frank's behavior to media scrutiny that made continued harassment professionally dangerous for his career and public reputation. More importantly, the legal battle demonstrated to Frank that Ava was willing to fight publicly rather than endure his harassment silently, changing the cost-benefit analysis that had made stalking her psychologically satisfying and practically consequence-free. Modern recognition and warning. Frank Sinatra's systematic stalking of Ava Gardner represents one of entertainment history's most documented examples of how celebrity status and wealth can be weaponized to conduct sophisticated harassment campaigns that destroy victims' lives while maintaining legal impunity. From a legal perspective, Ava's case helped establish precedents for recognizing stalking as a serious crime rather than a romantic pursuit, while demonstrating the need for legal protections that could address the sophisticated harassment capabilities available to wealthy, powerful individuals. The psychological impact of Frank's stalking campaign was permanent, affecting Ava's ability to form trusting relationships and maintain emotional stability for the rest of her life. The trauma of systematic surveillance and threats created lasting damage that influenced her personal and professional decisions for decades. Contemporary understanding of stalking behavior recognizes Frank's campaign against Ava as a textbook example of how obsessive individuals use surveillance, intimidation, and social isolation to maintain control over victims who attempt to establish independence from abusive relationships. The entertainment industry's response to Frank's behavior was largely protective of his career rather than supportive of Ava's safety, demonstrating how institutional power protects perpetrators while isolating victims who seek help or legal protection from systematic harassment. Modern anti-stalking laws and victim protection services were developed partly in response to cases like Ava's, where traditional legal remedies proved inadequate for addressing the sophisticated harassment capabilities of wealthy, well-connected stalkers. The story serves as a warning about how celebrity worship and public image management can conceal dangerous behavior while enabling powerful individuals to conduct harassment campaigns that would result in serious criminal consequences for ordinary people. The cultural impact extends beyond entertainment to influence broader understanding of how domestic abuse continues after relationships end, and how systematic stalking represents a form of psychological terrorism designed to maintain control over victims who attempt to escape abusive partnerships. If this story of systematic harassment and narrow escape moved you, subscribe to the Sinatra Lost Vault and hit that notification bell. We're revealing the hidden dangers of celebrity obsession that show how fame and power can become weapons against anyone who dares to seek independence. What other cases of celebrity harassment deserve investigation? Let us know in the comments below.